Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Block Thrasher Daily Crypto Update. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate all of you. Got a little bit of a different show today. This is going to be a different episode for sure. We're going to do some of the normal things. We're going to look at the market. We're going to talk about a couple of news stories really quickly. But then we're going to dive deep into a subject which kind of sort of has to do with politics, but not really politics. It has more to do with how the world actually works. See, I've believed for a long time, and I am absolutely convinced that a lot of what happens within politics is smoke and mirrors. There's the right, there's the left, there's the Democrat, there's the Republican, and all of this going on just creates the appearance of power and that actual things are being done. But if you sort of zoom out and you look at what's going on over the decades, over the years, right? All kinds of promises are made by politicians, by presidents, whoever, while they're campaigning. Then they get into office, and for the most part, especially when it comes to the economic realm, and especially even more so, the monetary realm, the things that have to do with our monetary system and the Federal Reserve and the central bank, etc., they all do the same thing. They all essentially do the same thing. And monetary base just keeps expanding and government programs keep expanding. And we continue to see this march toward crony capitalism. Well, that's long been the case. Socialism and policies and behaviors which benefit the major, massive corporations, especially the global international corporations. And we're going to look into just a little bit of the history of that, because the foundation for all of that has been happening for a long, long, long time. And it does tie into crypto, into an individual who's made some statements about crypto and about the fact that crypto is not going anywhere and it's here to stay. And that individual just happens to be very closely tied, if not one of the key personalities and individuals within what I will call the shadow government, which isn't so much in the shadows, but what I mean by that term is that I believe there is essentially a government which is made up of individuals within primarily the banking world, right? That actually pull the strings, the people that control the money, people that control the monetary system, the people that control the global monetary system, economic system. These are the people that actually run the world, not the president of the United States. Sure, the president has some power. Sure, the Congress has some power. Yes, the Senate has the Supreme Court. All of these entities, they have some power. But at the end of the day, they know that their power is derived from their ability. This is huge. This is huge. Governments understand. Presidents understand. And if they don't, they're instructed and they learn quickly. The Congress, the Senate, all the branches of government, they all understand that their power is derived from their ability to spend money on the things that they need to spend money or want to spend money on. Everything from financing war to providing welfare and social services, Medicare, Medicaid, stimulus, you go on and on and on. All of this, all of it. Their power is it's not derived. Their power to do all of that is not derived from anything other than their ability to spend without restraint an unlimited amount of money, because it just gets created, and it creates debt. And that debt just gets pushed off down into the populace through taxation, through inflation, the invisible tax. And this is what gives them their power. Yes, one can argue they also hold the biggest gun, and that's true. And so they have the power to, through law, essentially, lock you up if you don't comply, if you don't pay your taxes, if you don't abide by the rules, if you don't finance their behaviors or do whatever it is, you'll very soon find yourself in prison, right? So we're going to get into some of that. But before we do that, let's look at our word of today, which is actually very apropos. Plenipotent. Plenipotent. It means invested with or possessing full power. And you see this in what I was just talking about and describing. It is the entities, the people, the groups that are not elected, that are not in power because of a democratic republic representative governmental type of system, that are plenipotent, They possess the power because they control the money. And everything requires money. And if you have unlimited resources, as they essentially do, you have plenipotent power. You have full power, unrestrained power. All right, let's take a look at the market really quickly here today. What's going on? Things aren't looking good currently. We're back into the red. Total market capitalization is down 1.4% to $1.839 trillion. It's Friday. It's May 21st. We did see that there was, after the crash, we'll call it, of May 19th, we did see a bounce back. We started to see recovery. And Bitcoin is holding. Bitcoin is at $41,000.94, up from, it hit a low of 30. However, we're still significantly down, 17.5% on the week. So it looks like we're going to have a little bit of a rough weekend. Traditionally, historically, normally, the weekend can be a tough time. It starts to roll into Saturday, Sunday, Monday, even through Monday. So what's going to happen? I don't know. Nobody does. Of course, there are analysts out there using their TA to predict that we're going down to 20,000 Bitcoin. There's others that are calling that the bottom has come in. Others that are saying we're going to go up now to 200,000. Nobody knows. What we do know is that the macro trends remain the same. Adoption is increasing. More people are coming in. The technology is advancing. The use cases are advancing, not just here in the United States, but globally around the world. The institutionals are coming in. Yes, there may be manipulation occurring along with that, driving the price down. We know the data is in. We have a story today that shows this. Large Bitcoin withdrawals from Coinbase continue at strong dip. Institutional buying goes on. Here are the details. Bitcoin withdrawals from Coinbase are higher than from other exchanges. Glassnode chart shows that on 3 major exchanges except Coinbase, Bitcoin bounces have been rising over the past 2 months. The leading platform here is Binance, which has registered both the highest increase in Bitcoin bounces and a decrease. Next comes the Winklevoss twins Gemini, followed by the largest Chinese exchange, Huobi. US-based Coinbase is, on the contrary, demonstrating largely shrinking balances of the flagship digital currency. So what this means is that US institutional buyers continue to buy. It's on the other exchanges, which are not used by the institutions as much, where people are selling. So during this crash, as I've been saying the last couple of days, you've got retailer investors panicking, getting out, and the institutions are coming in and buying it up for cheap. Be like the institutionals. HODL. All right, back to the market. Ethereum is $2,732, down 6.4% last 24 hours. Binance Coin is $384, down 5%. Cardano, $1.71, down 7.9%. XRP at number 6, down 7.8%, $1.14. Dogecoin, down 6.2%, 39 cents. Polkadot, down 5.7%, 28.21. Internet Computer, down 9.9%, 169.59. Bitcoin Cash, 809. Litecoin, 207. Uniswap, 26. Chainlink, 29. Stellar, 48. Solana, 41. Solana's holding off the bears a little bit. Polygon, down 18.1% to $1.71. So we're not down quite as we were in terms of buying opportunity. Right now, it looks like this is a sit tight, hold situation, because most likely, if you were prepared to buy, quote, buy the dip, then you did that already, because these prices are up from where we were on the 19th. If you weren't able to seize that opportunity, these prices seem very low in many cases, and it's either going to go one or of two ways. It's either going to go back up or back down. Obviously, over the weekend we might see some good buying opportunities. If we see another 10 or 20% drop on some of the alts, especially, it could be a really great time to stack some of your favorite projects. Here's some good news coming out of the Netherlands. The Dutch central bank, or do you call it Deutschland? I'm not sure. What do you call it? The Dutch is not the same as the nation, right? In any event, the Dutch central bank has been defeated by Bitcoin exchange in a major court case. Dutch cryptocurrency exchanges are no longer required to verify wallet addresses after the Netherlands bank, DNB, backtracked on the policy according to a May 20 announcement made by Bitcoin trading platform Bitonic. Bitonic took the central bank of the Netherlands to court this January, seeking a preliminary injunction to put an end to the draconian Know Your Customer KYC rule. Wow! DNB made it mandatory for exchanges to verify whether their users are the legitimate controllers of their wallets in 2019, which was viewed as privacy overreach. Yeah, you know what's so ridiculous about all of this? These central banks, in this case of the Netherlands, Dutch, Netherlands Bank, or whatever they're called, the Netherlands Bank. Suddenly, we live in this digital age, and now because of that, they want to seize upon this opportunity to track absolutely everything everyone does, every transaction, and to know. So there's know your customers and these anti-money laundering, blah, 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 blah. And it's like for decades and decades, and we've been interacting with each other with cash. There's no know your customer. You know what I'm saying? Like this, none of this existed until we came to the modern computer age, and suddenly it's like, oh yeah, well, this can make our jobs easier trying to find. And that's not what it's about anyway. Terrorists aren't stupid. Criminals aren't stupid. They're not going to walk into a bank or go onto a cryptocurrency exchange and comply with and put in their legitimate information to engage in illegal activity. Duh. If anything, what this does is it creates more crime because they go and steal other people's identities and do it with those identities. Identity fraud, identity theft is massively on the rise, and it circumvents all this. And so then what happens is the innocent person, right, ends up being investigated for some sort of criminal activity that they never did, or they just avoid these things altogether and they use cash, or they use the traditional banking system. We talked about that before. But anyway, I see this as a huge win. I don't know that it'll translate out to other countries, but good for this judge, good for the court system over there in the Netherlands that is protecting people's privacy. You see, because what happens with this know your customer thing is all of that gets recorded, and all of your transactions and what you do. Let me paint a picture for you here for a second, okay? All right. Sarah. We'll just pick a name. Sarah. Sarah lives in the Netherlands. Sarah signs up for an account on Bitonic. Sarah has to go through this KYC process. So she gives her driver's license. She takes a picture of herself, a selfie. She gives her social security number. She gives her address. She gives all of her personal information and details when she signs up. All of that information then gets stored in their database. Then she goes and she buys, because Sarah's doing pretty well, $200,000 worth of crypto. Then Bitonic's database gets hacked, and all that KYC information and all the transactions are made known. And the hacker goes, "Oh, look, here's Sarah who lives at," because her address is in the database. "Oh, and this is what she looks like," because we've got a picture of her. "Oh, and she's got $200,000 of crypto," right? And then one day they show up at her home, hold a gun to her head and say, "Give us your private keys," or "Give us your username and password to Bitonic," or whatever. You follow what I'm saying? That information isn't necessarily secure, because repeatedly, over and over again, major corporations announce that, "Oops, we've been hacked," and thousands and hundreds of thousands of users' information is now out on and so it actually puts people at risk, all for a misguided attempt to try to stop money laundering or criminal activity. And it doesn't accomplish that. Besides, yeah, it's harder to do your jobs as law enforcement or regulatory agencies or whatever, while also allowing your citizens to enjoy privacy, granted. But you know what? Freedom is worth that price, that difficulty. Just get better at what you're doing. Use old school investigation tactics or whatever it takes. This typically is not about saving lives anyway. This is about making sure that people are paying taxes and compliance and this sort of thing and that sort of thing, or whatever. You know, there's a better way. There's got to be a better way. All right, moving on to our last segment. We are going to talk about this Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR. What is the Council on Foreign Relations? This is from Wikipedia, just a little bit of an overview. I know not the greatest source in the world, but this info is pretty decent. It's just not opinion here. This is just some info about what this is. There are two types of Council on Foreign Relations membership: life and term membership. So that's number one. This Council on Foreign Relations has people on it that are lifelong members. There's no election. This is not democracy. This is not representative government at work. Okay. So there's life and term membership, which lasts for 5 years, the term membership, and is available to those between the ages of 30 and 36 at the time of their application. Only U.S. citizens, native born or naturalized, and permanent residents who have applied for U.S. citizenship are eligible. A candidate for life membership must be nominated in writing by one council member and seconded by a minimum of 3 others. Strongly encouraged to be other CFR members. So that's how you get in for life. This is an elite club. Club's a nice word. I'd rather call it a cabal, in which lifelong membership occurs when a current member nominates you and then 3 others agree. Corporate membership is $250 in total. It's divided into 3 levels: founders, $100,000, president's circle, $60,000, and affiliates, $30,000. All corporate executive members have opportunities to hear distinguished speakers such as overseas presidents, prime ministers, chairmen and CEOs of multinational corporations, and U.S. officials and congressmen. President's circle and founders are also entitled to other benefits, including attendance at small private dinners or receptions with senior American officials and world leaders. The board of directors of the Council on Foreign Relations is composed in total of 35 officers. It also has an international advisory board consisting of 35 distinguished individuals from around the world. Chairman of the board is David Rubenstein. Vice Chairman Blair Efron, Jamie Miskik, and the president is Richard N. Haas. Let's dive into this a little bit deeper. We're going to jump into this article from Murray Rothbard. First, we're going to read some from the introduction which is by Justin Raimondo. Justin Raimondo. This from the Mises Institute, which is a phenomenal resource if you want to learn about the Austrian School of Economics and you want to learn more about how our economic system, our monetary system, and the differences between the belief system of those who believe in real money, who I might also add were our fathers of crypto in this way. Almost everyone that has launched a major cryptocurrency and created a major cryptocurrency and invented a cryptocurrency, from Nakamoto to Vitalik Buterin of Ethereum, Charles Hoskinson of Cardano, Woods of Polkadot. You can go down the list, right? Are coming from the libertarian ideology and are well versed in these people that I'm talking about: Murray Rothbard, Ludwig von Mises, and they are fully aware and understand the differences between the Austrian School of Economics and the Keynesian School of Economics, which is, our biggest proponent of today would be a guy like Krugman, who just believes that we can print ourselves to prosperity and who calls Bitcoin a Ponzi scheme, which is asinine, because it doesn't even have the core components of a Ponzi scheme, which is when a group of individuals take advantage of investors by taking investors' money and giving it to the new investors and creating a a scheme that creates a false return, where the new investors are like, wow, I immediately made some money. And so they put in more, and then more come in underneath that, and eventually it runs out. Well, this isn't what's happening when you put money into Bitcoin. Yeah, there's the number go up principle. So it might increase in purchasing power is how you make money with Bitcoin. Why? Because of its limited supply. In a Ponzi scheme, there's no limited supply. When you come into Bitcoin, you're buying an asset that's limited in number. So you have a piece of a pie. And the more people that want a piece of that pie, the more valuable the piece that you hold becomes. It's not a Ponzi scheme. It's just that as more people come in, there's less of it. It's not that as more people come in, that money is being used to fund your investment. That's not the way it is. And it's all relative to the dollar anyway. And I mean, there's so many factors there. But anyway, enough on that. But where I want to go with this just a little bit is talk for a little bit about the idea of conspiracy. And this is where the Council on where the Council on Foreign Relations comes in. And I just want to talk for a second here, because and Rothbard does address this a little bit in what we're going to read through here and discuss. But conspiracy theory has been used of late to delegitimize people who want to talk about truths of how the world works, of how humanity works, in my view. It's an easy way to push people into the fringe and to discredit them by saying, oh, that's just a conspiracy theory, whatever. But here's the reality. People, everyone conspires. If you engage in a business, you are going to sit down with your board of directors or your partners, and you are going to look at the market and you're going to say, what are our competitors doing and how can we beat them? And you're going to do whatever you can to do better than they do and to beat them out. And sometimes in the corporate world, this even gets pushed into unethical behaviors, maybe even immoral behaviors. But this is what is done, and you conspire. Now, if you are in the elite, part of the elite, in the elite level, status, whatever you want to call it, do you not think that you also are then going to get together with other people in your strata and conspire on how to increase your power and your money? Of course you are. This is what happens. This is the nature of humanity. Now, granted, people can come up with some crazy radical conspiracy theories. Sure. Some nutty stuff where there's no evidence. But as we've seen with Snowden, for instance, sometimes what is once thought to be nutty ends up being proven to be true and legitimate. But I'm talking bigger picture human behavior here. The idea of conspiracy is not only legitimate, it is definitive. That is what humanity does. From the earliest of days, people would come together. That's what community is, or alliances. And they would form an alliance for the sake of protection, and then war, and on it goes. It's conspiring. It's not even necessarily a bad thing. It can be done with altruistic motives or pure motives, right? So the Council on Foreign Relations, the Federal Reserve, and the banking system, these three are intertwined and they conspire. What do they conspire to do? To expand the power and the wealth of the members and the founding institutions and entities that took part in it. And we're going to learn a little bit about that. Let's dive into this here. We're jumping into different parts of this too. I will provide a link in the description of the podcast and the video. So if you want to go read this, because there's a lot here to digest, later you can do that, and I highly recommend it. But jumping in, the last thing American bankers want is an unfettered banking system. Murray Rothbard, right? One of the great minds of the Austrian School of Economics. Rothbard not only traces the original market distortion that gives rise to the business cycle, but also identifies the source and chief beneficiaries of this distortion. So what he's talking about with this market distortion that gives rise to the business cycle is the Federal Reserve System, the monetary system, the banking system that creates ever since its beginning in 1913, this boom and bust cycle where we have good economies, and then we have where the economy slows and we have a recession, sometimes even depression. It was Mises who pointed out that government intervention in the economy invariably leads to yet more intervention in order to fix the havoc wreaked. And there is a certain logic in the fact that it was the original culprits who decided to, quote, fix the distortions and disruptions caused by their policies, which further assaults on the market mechanism. This is so true. More recently, it's been stated by Rahm Emanuel under the Obama administration, such, never let a good crisis go to waste. Because that's when you have the ability to expand your power and to grab more. And what Murray and Mises are pointing out here, and Justin in this article, is that often the crisis itself is created by the government, who then comes in as the solution to the problem which they created, with more regulation and more power grab, more control, etc. New institutions that get created, three-letter acronym institutions like the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, or whatever it is. As Grinder and Hegel put it, in the United States, this intervention initially involved sporadic measures, both at the federal and state level, which generated inflationary distortion in the monetary supply and cyclical disruptions of economic activity. The disruptions which accompanied the business cycle were a major factor in the transformation of the dominant ideology in the United States from a general adherence to laissez-faire doctrines to an ideology of political capitalism, which viewed the state as a necessary instrument for the rationalization and stabilization of an inherently unstable economic order. Yeah, these guys write in a pretty high level, so you've got to really track with this stuff sometimes. But what they're saying is that at one time, we had more of a laissez-faire, just let the free market do what it does. Let capitalism and the free market work, to where then it became an ideology of political capitalism, which we sometimes now speak of as crony capitalism, where it's not really capitalism. It's like this hybrid of socialistic capitalism, where the monetary system is manipulated and controlled by the Federal Reserve rather than operating freely, where money is given to the people who play the game, and to the people and companies and entities and institutions that are in a line with those in power, right? Capitalists as enemies of capitalism. This explains the strange historical fact, recounted at length and in detail by Rothbard, that the biggest capitalists have been the deadliest enemies of capitalism. Ironically, for virtually all of the alleged social reforms, quote reforms, of the past 50 years were pushed not only by idealistic leftists, but by the very corporate combines characterized characterized as the top-hated, pot-bellied, quote, economic royalist of Wall Street. The neoconservative right depicts the battle against big government as a two-sided Manichaean, and if you're not familiar with what that word Manichaean is, basically it's light and darkness. But here's the actual definition: an adherent of the dualistic religious system of man's, a combination of Gnostic Christianity, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, and various other elements, with a basic doctrine of a conflict between light and dark, matter being regarded as dark and evil. So going back to this, we'll start from the paragraph again so you can catch it. The neoconservative right depicts the battle against big government as a two-sided Manichaean struggle between the forces of light, that is of capitalism, and the remnants of largely discredited leftist elites, which they're portraying as the forces of darkness, right? But Rothbard's historical analysis reveals a much richer, more complex pattern. Instead of being two-sided, the struggle for liberty pits at least three sides, each against the other. For the capitalist, as John T. Flynn, Albert J. Nock, and Frank Chodorov all pointed out, were never for capitalism. As Nock put it, it is one of the few amusing things, this is quoting Nock, it is one of the few amusing things in our rather stodgy world that those who today are behaving most tremendously about collectivism and the Red Menace, an allusion to Russia, are the very ones who have cajoled, bribed, flattered, and bedeviled the state into taking each and every one of the successive steps that lead straight to collectivism. The New Deal economic policy was, as Rothbard demonstrated, prefigured by Herbert Hoover, champion of big business. So you would think capitalist, right? And foreshadowed in the reforms of the progressive era, as revisionist economic historians such as Gabriel Kolko have shown. Those who regulated the great industries in the name of progressive, quote, reform were recruited for the very cartels and trusts they were created to tame. And of course, the monopolists didn't mind being tamed so long as their competitors were tamed, if not eliminated. Every giant leap forward of economic planning and centralization, central banking, the welfare state, civil rights, and affirmative action was supported, if not initiated, by the biggest and most politically powerful business interest in the country. Which, is so interesting about this is that everyone thinks it's the opposite. Everyone thinks that these regulations, these social programs that are supposed to help the poor, helpless people come from the people, right? And are against big business and big government. And it's like, no, it's the exact opposite. Every giant, as is stated here, every giant leap forward of economic planning and centralization, central banking, the welfare state, civil rights, and affirmative action was supported, if not initiated, by the biggest and most politically powerful business interest in the country. The House of Morgan, the Rockefellers, and the Kunlobes must take their place alongside the first, second, and third internationals as the historic enemies of liberty. These uber wealthy families, the House of Morgan, the Rockefellers, the Kunlobes, are the ones that pushed all of this, quote, progressive agenda of central banking, welfare state, civil rights, affirmative action, on it goes, right? Continuing on, giant multinational corporations and their economic satellites in alliance with governments and big banks are in the process of extending their influence on a global scale. This is where the Council on Foreign Relations comes in. They dream of a world central bank, global planning, and an international welfare state with American troops policing the world to guarantee their profit margins. See, this is not Republican, this is not Democrat, this is apolitical. These people, these Morgan, Rockefeller, they're globalist. They push for this agenda that makes everybody dependent on the government, that makes all of these social programs that make people dependent on the government to a point now where it's like people are not going to survive without stimulus checks, basic universal income. They want all this stuff. Why do they want all this stuff? Because then it expands their power, and they want to spread it out across the globe, all for their benefit. After the long battle to create a central bank in the United States, the high priest of high finance finally seized and consolidated control of domestic economic policy. It only remained for them to extend their dominance internationally. And for this purpose, they created the Council on Foreign Relations and later the Trilateral Commission. So see, the control was established domestically through the Federal Reserve, the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913. Through the banking system, central bank. And that what is being said here is now after that battle was over and they had won and established dominance, now it was time to extend that dominance internationally. And how and through what entity? According to Rothbard, and I agree, the Council on Foreign Relations, and later the Trilateral Commission. These two groups, back to the article, have been seized upon by the new populist right as the virtual embodiments of the power elite, and rightly so. It is only by reading Rothbard, however, that this insight is placed in its proper historical perspective. For the fact of the matter is that, as Rothbard shows, the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateralist Commission network, is merely the latest incarnation of a trend deeply rooted in a modern American history. Long before the founding of the CFR or the Trilateral Commission, there was a power elite in this country. That elite will likely endure long after those organizations are gone or transmuted into something else. Rothbard's unmasking of the historical and economic roots of this trend is vital in understanding that this is not a, quote, conspiracy centered in the CFR and the trilateralist groups as such, but an ideological trend traditionally centered in the Northeast among the upper class and deeply rooted in American history. I put the word conspiracy in quotes because it has become the favorite swear word of the respectable right and the extremist baiting left. If it is conspiracy mongering to believe that human beings engage in purposeful activity to achieve their economic, political, and personal goals, then rational men and women must necessarily plead guilty. Amen to that. Saying exactly what I opened up this monologue with. The alternative is to assert that human action is purposeless, random, and inexplicable. Yeah, exactly. People don't just go about their lives, especially powerful people, without purpose, randomly and inexplicably. No, they plan, they conspire. History in this view is a series of discontinuous accidents. Yeah, no. Yet it would be inaccurate to call the Rothbardian worldview a conspiracy theory. To say that the House of Morgan was engaged in a, quote, conspiracy to drag the United States into World War I, when indeed it openly used every stratagem, every lever, both economic and political, to push us into the, quote, war to end all wars, seems woefully inadequate. This was not some secret cabal meeting in a soundproof corporate boardroom, but a, quote, conspiracy of ideas openly and vociferously expressed. On this point, please note and underscore Rothbard's analysis of the founding of the new republic as the literary flagship of the growing alliance for war and statism between the Morgan interest and liberal intellectuals. And isn't it funny how some things never change? A conspiracy theory attributes virtually all social problems to a single monolithic agency. Radical feminism, which attributes all the evil in the world to the existence of men, is a classic conspiracy theory. The paranoid views of the ex-communists and the conservative movement who were obsessed with destroying their ex-comrades was another. But the complexity and subtlety of the Rothbardian analysis, backed up by the sheer mass of rich historical detail, sets Rothbard on an altogether different and higher plane. Here there is no single agency, no omnipotent central committee that issues directives, but a multiplicity of interest groups and factions whose goals are generally congruent. So basically what they're saying is it's not like you have this group of 6 men or families that sit in a room and plan this thing out. It's just that they control these other groups and entities that all have the same agenda and the same strategy. In this milieu, there are familial, social, and economic connections, as well as ideological complicity. And none is better than Rothbard at ferreting out and unraveling these biographical details. Taken together, the author's small and steady brushstrokes paint a portrayal of a ruling class whose ruthlessness is surpassed only by its brazen disloyalty to the nation. It is a portrait that remains unchanged in its essentials. To this day, Wall Street Banks and American Foreign Policy was written and published in 1984 during the Reagan years. Reagan started out by denouncing the power elite and specifically the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateralist. This is one of the reasons why I think Reagan was the greatest president of our time and actually an outsider. But wound up with that epitome of the establishment, skull and bones George Bush as his vice president and successor. Bush is a longtime CFR director and trilateralist. Most of his major cabinet officers, including his chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Colin Powell, were CFR members. The Clinton administration was similarly affected from the president's CFR trilateral on down through Donna Shalala. CFR president was CFR trilateral, Donna Shalala CFR trilateral, George Stephanopoulos CFR, with the CFR honeycombed as usual throughout the State Department. In addition to Secretary of State Warren Christopher, other CFR members in the Clinton cabinet included Laura Tyson, Chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, Treasury Secretary Robert Rubin, Interior Secretary Bruce Babbitt, HUD Honcho Henry Sinesros, and Alice Rivlin, OMB Director. The other side of the aisle is equally co-opted at the leadership level, as vividly dramatized by Gingrich's retreat before the power and majesty of Henry Kissinger. One naturally expects cowardice from politicians, but the indictment also includes what passes for the intellectual leaders of the Republican free market revolution. There's a certain mentality that no matter how convincing the evidence, would never even consider the argument put forward in Wall Street Banks and American Foreign Policy. This attitude stems from a particular kind of cowardice. It is fear, first of all, of not being listened to, a dread of consigning oneself to the role of Cassandra, the ancient Greek prophetess who is granted the power of foresight by the gods, with but a single limitation that none would ever heed her warnings. It is far easier and so much more lucrative to play the role of court historian. Moving on to a section that speaks of Wall Street, banks, and American foreign policy. This is by Rothbard. Businessmen or manufacturers can either be genuine free enterprisers or statists. They can either make their way on the free market or seek special government favors and privileges. You know, and most of the corporations today, from the Amazons to the Teslas to the Googles, that are massively huge, fall into the second category. They are statists who have not made their way on the free market per se, but have sought and received special government favors and privileges. Not going to dive into that today, not prepared for it, but it's absolutely true. That's part of the crony capitalist system that we live in now. If you're doing something that is thought to be more environmentally friendly, or for some reason in the good graces of somebody, whether they be within the trilateral or the CFR or on the president himself or in the administration, you get all kinds of economic incentives and benefits, and your company does well, and you grow in power, right? So they can either make their way on the free market or seek special government favors and privileges. They choose according to their individual preferences and values. But bankers are inherently inclined toward statism. And that's because they need the state to be the enforcement vehicle, the big gun to come in. Because people aren't going to use the banking system if it becomes predatory, if interest rates earned are so low when you deposit, but really high when you get a loan, or other types of factors and on all the issues, right? So commercial bankers engaged as they are in unsound fractional reserve credit are in the free market always teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Hence, they are always reaching for government aid and bailout. And this is crazy because Rothbard isn't live anymore, and this was written back in '84, I believe, well before the great financial crisis of 2008, 2009, when we saw this so starkly illustrated in the big bailouts, which have continued. And so these bankers know, because of their fractional reserve system, which if you're not familiar with, basically just means that they run stupid, crazy margins, right? Where they don't have the money of their depositors because they aren't required to. They just have a fraction. They retain a fraction on the balance sheets in reserves, and the rest they recklessly, at times, and what caused the great financial crisis of 2008, 2009, recklessly invested in things at that time like mortgage-backed securities and all kinds of other things, right? So what happens is when we are putting our money into the bank, they are using it for their betterment, for their empowerment, making insane profits, whether it be in the stock market or wherever, giving us almost nothing back in the form of interest in recent years, running this huge risk, all because they know that they have the government in their back pocket and are going to get bailed out if need be. And through the Federal Reserve banking system, there's a mechanism for it, so that they don't care. Moving forward here in the article, investment bankers do much of their business underwriting government bonds in the United States and abroad. Therefore, they have a vested interest in promoting deficits and enforcing taxpayers to redeem government debt. Both sets of bankers, then, tend to be tied in with government policy and try to influence and control government actions in domestic and foreign affairs. In the early years of the 19th century, the organized capital market in the United States was largely confined to government bonds, then called stocks, along with canal companies and banks themselves. Whatever investment banking existed was therefore concentrated in government debt. From the Civil War until the 1890s, there were virtually no manufacturing corporations. Manufacturing and other businesses were partnerships and had not yet reached the size where they needed to adopt the corporate form. The only exception was railroads, the biggest industry in the United States. The first investment banks, therefore, were concentrated in railroad securities and government bonds. The first major investment banking house in the United States was a creature of government privilege. J. Cook, an Ohio-born business promoter living in Philadelphia, and his brother Henry, editor of the leading Republican newspaper in Ohio, were close friends of Ohio U.S. Senator Salmon P. Chase. When the new Lincoln administration took over in 1861, the Cooks lobbied hard to secure Chase the appointment of Secretary of the Treasury. That lobbying, plus the then enormous sum of $100,000 that J. Cook poured into Chase's political coffers, induced Chase to return the favor by granting Cook, newly set up as an investment banker, an enormously lucrative monopoly in underwriting the entire federal debt. Cook and Chase then managed to use the virtual Republican monopoly in Congress during the war to transform the American commercial banking system from a relatively free market to a national banking system centralized by the federal government under Wall Street control. A crucial aspect of that system was the national banks could only expand credit in proportion to the federal bonds they owned, bonds they were forced to buy from Jay Cooke. Jay Cooke and Company proved enormously influential in the post-war Republican administrations, which continued their monopoly in underwriting government bonds. The House of Cooke met its well-deserved fate by going bankrupt in the Panic of 1874, a failure helped along by its great rival, the then Philadelphia-based Drexel, Morgan and Company. J.P. Morgan. After 1873, Drexel, Morgan, and its dominant figure, J.P. Morgan, became by far the leading investment firm in the United States. If Cooke had been a Republican bank, Morgan, while prudently well-connected in both parties, was chiefly influential among the Democrats. The other great financial interest powerful in the Democratic Party was the mighty European investment banking house of the Rothschilds, whose agent, Auguste Belmont, was treasurer of the National Democratic Party for many years. The influence of the Morgans on the Democratic administration of Grover Cleveland in 1884 to 88, later 1892 to 96, may be seen by simply glancing at their leading personnel. Grover Cleveland himself spent virtually all of his life in the Morgan ambit. He grew up in Buffalo as a railroad lawyer, one of his major clients being the Morgan-dominated New York Central Railroad. In between administrations, he became a partner of the powerful New York City law firm of Bangs, Stetson, Tracy, and McVeigh. This firm, by the late 1880s, had become the chief legal firm of the House of Morgan, largely because senior partner Charles B. Tracy was J.B. Morgan's brother-in-law. After Tracy died in 1887, Francis Lind Stetson, an old and close friend of Cleveland, became the firm's dominant partner, as well as the personal attorney for J.P. Morgan. This is now the Wall Street firm of Davis, Polk, and Wardwell. Grover Cleveland's cabinet became honeycombed with Morgan men, with an occasional bow to other bankers. Considering those officials most concerned with foreign policy, his first Secretary of State, Thomas F. Bayard, was a close ally and disciple of Auguste Belmont. Indeed, Belmont's son Perry had lived with and worked for Bayard in Congress as his top aide. The dominant Secretary of State in the second Cleveland administration was the powerful Richard Olney, a leading lawyer for Boston financial interests, who have always been tied in with the Morgans, and in particular was on the board of the Morgan-run Boston and Maine Railroad, and would later help Morgan organize the General Electric Company. The War and Navy departments under Cleveland were banker-nominated. Secretary of War in the second Cleveland administration was an old friend, aide of Cleveland's, Daniel. It just goes on and on and on. Here, Rothbard is going through and outlining all of the collusion, all of the connections of how the banking world and the Morgans and the Rothschilds influenced the politics of our nation way back in the 1800s. The great turning point of American foreign policy came in the early 1890s during the second Cleveland administration. It was then that the United States turned sharply and permanently from a foreign policy of peace and non-intervention to an aggressive program of economic and political expansion abroad. It is a notable series of articles in 1894. Bankers magazine set the agenda for the remainder of the decade. Its conclusion: if we could wrest the South American markets from Germany and England and permanently hold them, this would be indeed a conquest worth perhaps a heavy sacrifice. So I'm not going to continue on through all of this because it goes on and on and on, and there's just a ton of detail and documentation regarding all of this and how it all involves the Council on Foreign Relations and how this is connected with war. This portion here on the fortuitous Fed we'll read from a little bit and discuss. The massive U.S. loans to the Allies and the subsequent American entry into the war could not have been financed by the relatively hard money gold standard system that existed before 1914. Fortuitously, an institution was established at the end of 1913 that made the loans and war finance possible, the Federal Reserve System. By centralizing reserves, by providing a government-privileged lender of last resort to the banks, the Fed enabled the banking system to inflate money and credit, finance loans to the Allies, and float massive deficits once the United States entered the war. In addition, the seemingly odd Fed policy of creating an acceptance market out of thin air by standing ready to purchase acceptance at a subsidized rate enabled the Fed to rediscount acceptance on munitions exports. Wow. The Federal Reserve was the outgrowth of 5 years of planning, amending, and compromising among various politicians and concerned financial groups, led by the major financial interests, including the Morgans, the Rockefellers, and the Kunlobes, along with their assorted economists and technicians. Particularly notable among the Rockefeller interests were all these people, blah, 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 blah. And igniting the drive for a Federal Reserve System was Jacob F. Schiff. There's a bunch of history here. While the establishment of the Federal Reserve System in late 1913 was a result of a coalition of Morgan, Rockefeller, and Kunlob interests, there's no question which financial group controlled the personnel and the policies of the Fed once it was established. While influential in framing policies of the Federal Reserve Board member, Warburg was disqualified from leadership because of his pro-German views. The first Federal Reserve Board, appointed by President Wilson in 1914, included Warburg, one Rockefeller man, Frederick A. Delano, uncle of Franklin D. Roosevelt, and president of the Rockefeller-controlled Wabash Railway, and an Alabama banker. So it was the Rockefellers and those who were connected with them. There's more here about Benjamin Strong, but I'm not going to continue on with this. The main thrust of where I wanted to go with this was about the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations. We'll quickly blast through this last section here and wrap things up. The CFR, the American branch of the new group, took a while to get going. Finally, the still inactive American Institute of International Affairs merged with a defunct outfit. It began in 1918 of New York businessmen concerned with the post-war world and organized as a dinner club to listen to foreign visitors. This organization, the Council of Foreign Relations, had as its honorary chairman Morgan lawyer Elihu Root, while Alexander Hempel, chairman of Morgan's Guarantee Trust Company, was chairman of its finance committee. In August 1921, the two organizations merged into the new Council on Foreign Relations, Inc., a high-powered organization embracing bankers, lawyers, and intellectuals. While varied financial interests were represented in the new organization, the CFR was Morgan-dominated from top to bottom. Honorary President Elihu Root, President was John W. Davis, Wilson's Solicitor General, and now Chief Counsel for J.P. Morgan and Company. Davis was to become Democratic presidential candidate in 1924. Secretary-Treasurer of the new CFR was Harvard economic historian Edwin F. Gay, Director of Planning and Statistics for the Shipping Board during the war, and now editor of the New York Evening Post, owned by his mentor, Morgan partner Thomas W. Lamont. It was Gay who had the idea of founding Foreign Affairs, the CFR's quarterly journal, and who suggested both his Harvard colleague Archibald Coolidge as the first editor and the New York Post reporter Hamilton Fish Armstrong as assistant editor and executive director of the CFR. Other prominent officials in the new CFR were Frank L. Polk, former Undersecretary of State and now lawyer for J.P. Morgan and Company, Paul M. Warburg of Kuhn Loeb, Otto H. Kahn of Kuhn Loeb, former Undersecretary of State under Wilson, Norman H. Davis, a banking associate of the Morgans, and a vice president, Paul D. Cravath, senior partner of the Rockefeller-oriented Wall Street law firm of Cravath, Swain, and Moore. After World War II, the Council on Foreign Relations became dominated by the Rockefeller rather than the Morgan interest, a shift of power reflecting a general alteration in financial power in the world at large. After World War II, the rise of oil to prominence brought the Morgans and Rockefellers, once intense rivals, into an Eastern establishment of which the Rockefellers were the senior and the Morgans the junior partners. During the 1930s, the Rockefellers pushed hard for war against Japan, which they saw as competing with them vigorously for oil and rubber resources in South Asia, and as endangering the Rockefellers' cherished dreams of a mass China market for petroleum products. On the other hand, the Rockefellers took a non-interventionist position in Europe, where they had close financial ties with German firms such as IG Farben and Company, and very few close relations with Britain and France. The Morgans, in contrast, as usual, deeply committed to their financial ties with Britain and France, once again pumped early for war with Germany, while the interest in the Far East had become minimal. Indeed, U.S. Ambassador to Japan, Joseph C. Grew, former Morgan partner, was one of the few officials in the Roosevelt administration genuinely interested in peace with Japan. World War II might therefore be considered from one point of view as a coalition war. The Morgans got their war in Europe, the Rockefellers theirs in Asia. Such disgruntled Morgan men as Lewis W. Douglas and Dean G. Acheson, a protege of Henry Stimson, who had left the early Roosevelt administration in disgust at its soft money policies and economic nationalism, came happily roaring back into government service with the advent of World War II. Nelson A. Rockefeller, for his part, became head of Latin American activities during World War II. I'm going to stop there. You've seen enough, and you can go read this later. All of the collusion that's been going on in this country from ages ago between the big banks and the government, and the financing of the government, and the lobbying and manipulation of the government to create these entities like the Federal Reserve and the Council on Foreign Relations, and it goes on, there's many others, to consolidate power that even leads to war, international war, for the economic betterment of these entities, these banks primarily. That's what we're speaking about. That's where I wanted to go. Why is all of this so interesting in today's news? Well, here's one reason. When we were looking at what Wikipedia has to say about the Council on Foreign Relations, you might have noted that the chairman of the board is David Rubenstein. David Mark Rubenstein is an American billionaire, businessman, and philanthropist. A former government official and lawyer, he is co-founder and co-executive chairman of the American private equity firm, the Carlyle Group, a global private equity investment company. Another big banking entity, right? Well, this is what he just said recently. Governments can't stop cryptocurrencies. After asserting that cryptocurrencies are here to stay, David Rubenstein outlined that governments can't stop investors from investing in them. Governments wanting or being able to stop cryptocurrencies is, quote, unrealistic at this point, noted the former chairman of the Smithsonian Institute, David Rubenstein. Furthermore, he outlined digital assets' significant role in the financial industry and predicted that they are not going away. However, David Rubenstein, chairman of the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts and co-founder of the American private firm Carlyle Group, believes there's no such possibility. In a CNBC interview, the U.S. billionaire and philanthropist said cryptocurrencies exist and thrive because, quote, people in the market want something different than traditional currency. He asserted that digital assets are here to stay and indicated that governments wouldn't be able to halt their progress. They just keep repeating what he said. I hate it when articles do this. Commenting on this week's massive market crash, Rubenstein said people invested in his industry should expect something similar significant ups and downs from such a relatively new invention. He also warned those who are not prepared to face the enhanced volatility just to stay away. Although he hasn't invested in any digital assets directly, Rubenstein said he had allocated funds to companies within the industry. The significance of his words. Shortly after the interview, numerous crypto proponents took it to Twitter to outline his favorable approach. MicroStrategy CEO Michael Saylor was among the first. Apart from listing Rubenstein's current and former accolades, the executive described his words as auspicious for Bitcoin. Novogratz said this is really important and called Rubenstein one of the most respected investors with the best DC ties ever. Yeah, I should say. Head of the Council on Foreign Relations. So what's the takeaway from this? Travis King, before we go to that, one other thing here. Asset founder and CIO reminded that Rubenstein was, quote, the guy that hired Jay Powell before he was at the Fed and was his boss for 8 years. He also happens to run one of the largest and most swamp-connected PE firms in the world. Yeah, so that he's just noting there that Jay Powell was the guy that was brought in to deal with the stagflation, who raised interest rates and basically saved the economy. But going to the question, sorry guys, I had to stop. Excuse me for a second while I stop and take a drink here. What's the big takeaway from all of this? It's a little bit when the chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations comes out and makes a statement like this, it's always too I always like to look at these things adversarially and also with the positive and the negative, the pros and the cons, and it's a huge pro, because if you've got the chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations saying that crypto is here to stay, that's a signal. It's a signal that, at least here in the U.S., they're not going to outlaw crypto. They're not going to. That does not mean that they're not going to try to regulate it to the point where only the wealthy can play. Basically, that's always been my biggest concern. It's going to be done under the guise of protecting the retail consumer, protecting the little guy, right? And so that that's a concern. That would be the negative. The positive is what he's saying. It's here to stay. And if someone like that is saying that, it's the way it's going to be. So it alleviates regulatory concern on the negative side, or not on the negative side wholly, but on the in terms of complete ban. We're not going to see a Chinese style ban. It's not going to happen. Overall, mostly it sounds good. And in the back of my mind, I'm just thinking, okay, if the CFR types are making statements like this, is it because they believe that they've come up with a way to control, a control mechanism? See, that's what they're all about. But I don't know. Who knows? These people, as has been demonstrated, as Rothbard outlines clearly, they're not loyalists to the United States. They're loyalists to power. And they're not even loyalists to the US dollar or money. They're loyalists to power. The money, what they call money, this fiat currency, is just a mechanism for control. It's a mechanism. It's so deep. It runs so deep. I've talked about some of it on this podcast, but it goes into controlling even the other nations around the world. It's done through the monetary system. It's done through the banking system. It's done through the IMF. It's done through the World Bank, the Bank of International Settlements, the Federal Reserve. We're to the point where so many of the smaller nations that are really struggling have lost their sovereignty almost completely. And they know that. They get that. That's why some of them are talking about using crypto in replacement, to replace. Because see, here's the thing. Pull out $1 if you have it, if you happen to. Most people don't have physical cash anymore. Look at what it says on this. It says this is legal tender for all debts, public and private. These are debt instruments. What our money is a bank liability. That's what it is. And that debt-backed instrument, that system, as we outlined, as Rothbard was outlining in the article that we were briefly looking at, was created to enable our government and the governments around the world to finance whatever the hell they want to finance. Everything from war to welfare. That just bringing all of this back to what I opened up with today. That is the true power. That is how you rule the world. It's not through the political process anymore. So just a little bit kind of political again, which is not what the podcast is really about, but share with you guys my view of the world and my worldview of politics in the United States today is it's all smoke and mirrors. I've become increasingly apolitical. It isn't about Democrat. It isn't about Republican. I identify as a libertarian because I want freedom. I just want them. I want to be able to pursue life, liberty, happiness, go about, create a business, bring value to people. I want privacy. I want freedom. I don't want to lose freedom for some over-exaggerated war on terror, as if around every corner here in the United States there's some sort of Islamic terrorist group that's playing. No, it's not even real. That's not even the reality. We don't even do the things that would actually keep domestic terrorism from happening. We know who the terrorist people are. They don't hide it. They're vocal about it. We let them in. We don't do the things that would actually work. We do all this stuff, like making little old grandmas, get out of their wheelchair and take off their shoes at the airport and go through a nudie scan or a wand or whatever. We do all kinds of stupid things. But anyway, the final thought I have with all of that is that some people in the political world on both sides of the aisle think that our hope for the future is through government. Somehow government's going to reign, it's altruistic and made up of people that are just benevolent and, the stimulus checks. Wow, shoot, what a great government. They're giving me money, right? All the while they're playing with fire as they potentially destroy an economic system which benefits the elites. People on the lower end just get poorer and poorer. Everything gets more and more expensive. This is why crypto is booming. It's much, much, much more than a fast grab, get in, throw $1,000 into DOGE, make 10 or 20 or whatever you made, pull out. That's a game for the plebes, for those who don't give much thought to anything. Okay, fine. I get those types. Those are the people that are just like, they're I want to say hedonistic, right? Pleasure seeking. They're not thinking big picture. They're not thinking long term. They're not thinking, but the people that created cryptocurrency, the founders of most of the major projects, they understand everything that I'm talking about. And this is the ideology from which they're coming. And it's an attempt. It's more than just, it's an attempt to create an alternative system that is fair, that is real, with limited supplies of these cryptos, that are evenly distributed or well distributed, not necessarily evenly distributed, because if you lived in a world where everybody got $1 million tomorrow, and that's what they started out with, after about 6 months, you'd have people who had nothing, and you'd have people who were multi-millionaires. This is the way the world's humanity works, because there's smarter people out there that make wiser and better decisions, and there's stupid people do stupid stuff that ends up resulting in their poverty. Right? It's just the way it is. But the idea behind the system is that there's no centralized entity, that it's more of a democratic process. So you have governance systems coming in to all of the major proof-of-stake cryptocurrencies, whether it's Ethereum or Polkadot or Cardano or whatever sort of thing. It's really driven to be of and by and for the people, right? So it empowers the community, the people that are invested in it, not some central bank, not some JP Morgan Chase or Rockefeller family or other wealthy house that has so much money that they will never even be able to spend it in not their lifetime, but their children and their children and their children and their children and their children's lifetimes. All right? It's in hopes of taking some of the power back from those entities. It's not even about taking power from the US government. It's not, because they don't actually have the power. They influence, but they're more influenced. The people that come to power because of the money that allows them. And so then they're beholding to, right? You get what I'm saying? So this is my view anyway. Anyway, I hope that I've encouraged you, stimulated you to give some thought to these issues and to come on board and to be part of the cryptocurrency revolution. Really is what it is. It's a financial and economic revolution where we can hopefully step aside from the draconian measures that are put in place and the regulations that are put in place to benefit these big multinational corporate entities that are so powerful and pervasive and really they're not concerned about bettering our lives. They're just concerned about expanding their power. All right, friends, I've gone on long enough. I think this was a pretty long podcast. I hope you have a phenomenal day. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. As always, remember, it's a great day to stack and earn more crypto. Love and appreciate you all. I look forward to talking with you tomorrow. Press on now.